In a world where celebrity encounters are carefully orchestrated and royal protocols dictate every interaction, sometimes the most genuine moments happen when all pretense falls away. What occurs when two of the world's most beloved figures from completely different realms find themselves sharing an unguarded conversation that reveals the humanity behind the crowns and spotlights? This is the story of an evening that began as a formal charity gala and transformed into something far more meaningful. A moment when Prince William and Princess Catherine discovered that behind Cher's legendary persona lived a woman whose struggles with authenticity, family challenges, and finding genuine connection mirrored their own royal journey in ways nobody could have imagined. Sometimes the most profound encounters happen not in grand gestures, but in the quiet spaces between public moments, where real people emerge from behind their carefully crafted images to share truths that resonate across all boundaries of fame, fortune, and protocol. The autumn evening in London carried an unusual energy as Prince William adjusted his black tie for the third time, glancing at his reflection in the ornate mirror of their Kensington Palace apartment. Princess Catherine emerged from her dressing room, her emerald gown catching the warm lamplight, and noticed the slight tension in her husband's shoulders. "You seem more nervous than usual," she observed, fastening her grandmother's pearl earrings. "It's just another charity gala, isn't it?" William turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. "That's what I thought until I received the guest list this morning. Apparently, Cher specifically requested to meet us, not through the usual diplomatic channels, but personally. She's been supporting the Children's Hospital quietly for years, and when she learned we'd be there tonight, she asked if we could have a private conversation." Catherine paused in applying her lipstick. The name carried weight that transcended generations. Cher wasn't just a celebrity. She was an institution, someone whose career had spanned decades, and whose authenticity in a world of manufactured personalities had always struck both of them as remarkable. They had grown up hearing her music, had seen her evolution from a young singer to a global icon who never seemed to compromise her true self. "What did you tell them?" Catherine asked, though she could see from William's expression that he had already agreed. "I said yes, of course, but I'll admit I'm curious about what she wants to discuss." The organizers mentioned she seemed particularly interested in our work with mental health awareness and family foundations. The drive through London's evening traffic gave them time to reflect on the unusual request. Their security detail had briefed them on Cher's background beyond her public persona. Born Sherilyn Sarkeesian, she had built her career on unwavering authenticity, something that resonated deeply with their own struggles to maintain genuine identities within the constraints of public life. Her journey from a shy girl with an uncertain future to a confident woman who had reinvented herself multiple times while staying true to her core values offered parallels to their own navigation of duty versus personal desires. I read an interview she gave last year, Catherine mentioned as they approached the venue. She talked about how difficult it was to raise children in the public eye, how she tried to give them normal experiences while protecting them from the worst aspects of fame. It reminded me of our own challenges with George, Charlotte, and Louis. William nodded, remembering his own childhood struggles with public attention and his mother's efforts to provide normalcy within an abnormal situation. Princess Diana had often spoken about feeling isolated despite being surrounded by people, a sentiment he suspected Cher might understand intimately. The Royal Albert Hall glowed against the darkening sky, its iconic architecture highlighted by specially arranged lighting for the evening's event. The charity gala was supporting a children's hospital that had been close to both their hearts since their early marriage, and the guest list included a mixture of British aristocracy, international celebrities, and philanthropists whose combined influence could generate significant funding for pediatric care. As they stepped from their vehicle, the familiar sounds of camera clicks and respectful applause greeted them. The red carpet experience had become routine, but William found himself scanning the crowd of photographers and attendees for a glimpse of the evening's most intriguing guest. Cher had a reputation for arriving fashionably late, often making entrances that became memorable moments in themselves. Inside the venue's ornate lobby, they moved through the familiar routine of greeting organizers, donors, and fellow supporters. The conversations followed predictable patterns: updates on the hospital's progress, gratitude for royal patronage, and gentle requests for future involvement. Yet both William and Catherine found their attention occasionally drifting toward the entrance, wondering when their unexpected meeting would occur. Lady Margaret Thornberry, the event's chief organizer, approached them during the cocktail reception with barely contained excitement. "Your Royal Highnesses, I have wonderful news. Miss Cher arrived about 10 minutes ago and specifically asked if she could have a few minutes with you before the formal dinner begins. She's waiting in the green room, if you're available." The green room, traditionally a space for performers to prepare before taking the stage, had been converted into a private meeting area for VIP guests. As they made their way through the venue's elegant corridors, both William and Catherine felt an anticipation that differed from their usual royal engagements. This meeting carried no formal agenda, no predetermined talking points, and no clear diplomatic objectives. Their security detail took positions outside the room as William knocked gently on the heavy wooden door. "Come in," came a voice that was instantly recognizable despite being softer and more intimate than its familiar public projection. The room was decorated in rich burgundy and gold, with comfortable seating arranged around a central coffee table. Cher stood near the window, looking out at the London skyline, her silhouette elegant despite the casual nature of her posture. She turned as they entered, and what struck them immediately was not her famous presence, but the genuine warmth in her eyes. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said with a slight bow of her head that seemed more respectful than required by protocol. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I hope this isn't too presumptuous." "Not at all," William replied, extending his hand. "We're honored. Your support for the Children's Hospital has been remarkable, and we understand it's been ongoing for several years." "Please call me Cher," she said, shaking both their hand with a grip that was firm and confident. "And thank you for saying that, but honestly, the hospital's work speaks for itself. I've been fortunate enough to visit several times, and what your medical staff accomplishes every day is the real miracle." Catherine found herself immediately comfortable in Cher's presence. There was none of the artificial energy that sometimes surrounded celebrity encounters. Instead, Cher projected the kind of genuine interest and warmth that made conversation feel natural and unforced. "Would you like to sit?" Cher gestured toward the seating area. "I asked to meet you because I've been following your work with mental health awareness, particularly your efforts to destigmatize conversations about emotional well-being. It's something very close to my heart." As they settled into the comfortable chairs, the formal atmosphere of the evening seemed to fade away. Here was a woman who had spent decades in the public eye, who understood the challenges of maintaining authenticity while fulfilling public expectations, and who had specifically sought them out for what appeared to be a genuine conversation rather than a photo opportunity. "I hope you don't mind me asking," Cher continued, "but I'm curious about how you manage to stay grounded while dealing with constant public attention. I've been performing for over 50 years, and I still struggle sometimes with finding the balance between my public persona and my private self." The question caught both William and Catherine off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was so directly honest. Most celebrity interactions involve carefully neutral topics designed to avoid any potential controversies or personal revelations. Cher's immediate willingness to discuss something so personal created an atmosphere of unexpected intimacy. William glanced at Catherine before responding. "It's an ongoing challenge," he admitted. "We've found that having strong family foundations and maintaining relationships outside of public life helps, but there are definitely moments when the boundaries become blurred. The children make the biggest difference," Catherine added. "They keep us focused on what really matters. When George comes home from school excited about a football match, or Charlotte wants to show us a drawing she made, those moments remind us of the life we're trying to protect and nurture behind all the public obligations." Cher nodded with understanding that seemed deeply personal. I remember those feelings when Chaz and Elijah were young. The challenge of wanting to give them normal childhoods, while knowing that our family would always be different from others. Did you ever worry that you were somehow robbing them of experiences that other children take for granted? The question revealed a vulnerability that neither William nor Catherine had expected. Here was one of the world's most successful entertainers expressing concerns that closely mirrored their own parental anxieties. The realization that fame and royal status created similar challenges in child-rearing was both comforting and sobering. Every day, William replied without hesitation. I think about my own childhood, the parts that felt normal and the parts that definitely didn't. My mother worked very hard to give Harry and me experiences outside the royal bubble, but there were always limitations. Now, with our own children, we're trying to learn from those experiences while recognizing that the world has changed significantly. Diana was remarkable, Cher said softly. I met her several times at charity events, and what always struck me was her ability to make everyone around her feel seen and valued. She had this gift for connecting with people authentically, regardless of their background or circumstances. I imagine that's a quality you both try to honor in your own work. The mention of his mother brought a familiar mix of emotions for William. Princess Diana's legacy continued to influence their approach to royal duties, particularly their emphasis on mental health awareness and destigmatizing conversations about emotional well-being. That Cher had observed and appreciated those qualities in his mother created an unexpected connection between past and present. She taught us that true service means being willing to be vulnerable, Catherine said. Some of our most meaningful work has come from sharing our own struggles and challenges. When we talk about mental health, we're not speaking as experts offering advice to others, but as people who have experienced difficulties and found ways to seek help and support. Outside the green room, the sounds of the gala continued as guests moved from the cocktail reception toward the dining hall. But inside their small circle, time seemed to slow as three people who lived much of their lives in public found themselves engaged in the kind of honest conversation that rarely occurred in formal settings. Cher leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious. That's actually part of why I wanted to meet with you tonight. I've been thinking about doing something more public with my own experiences, particularly around family challenges and personal growth. But I'll admit, after all these years, I still sometimes worry about how much of myself to share. The admission revealed the evening's true purpose. This wasn't just a meet and greet between celebrities and royalty, but a conversation between people who understood the unique pressures of living authentic lives while fulfilling public expectations. Cher wasn't seeking advice as much as connection with others who navigated similar challenges. The atmosphere in the green room shifted as Cher's admission hung in the air. William and Catherine exchanged a glance that spoke volumes about their recognition of a moment that had moved beyond polite conversation into something more meaningful. Here was a woman whose career had been built on bold self-expression, yet she was revealing the same uncertainties about authenticity and vulnerability that they wrestled with regularly. What kind of experiences are you considering sharing? Catherine asked gently, her training as both a royal and a mother evident in her ability to create space for difficult conversations. Cher looked down at her hands for a moment before meeting their eyes again. Well, there's my relationship with Chaz during his transition. That was a journey that taught me so much about love, acceptance, and letting go of expectations you didn't even realize you had. For a while, I struggled with understanding what he was going through, and I made mistakes along the way. William felt a recognition in her words that went beyond the specific circumstances. The feeling of wanting to support someone you love while simultaneously trying to understand something outside your own experience, he said thoughtfully. We felt that with various family situations, though obviously different from what you describe. Exactly, Cher replied, her voice gaining strength. And Then there's the broader question of how public figures can discuss family challenges without exploiting them for attention or inadvertently causing harm to the people they love. It's a balance I've never quite figured out. Catherine nodded with understanding. Their own approach to sharing personal information had evolved over years of trial and error, guided by their desire to be helpful while protecting their children's privacy and dignity. We've learned that timing matters enormously, she said. Sometimes the most helpful thing we can share is our uncertainty and our process of learning, rather than presenting ourselves as having found perfect solutions. The conversation was interrupted briefly as a staff member knocked to inform them that dinner would begin in 15 minutes. Rather than ending their discussion, the time constraints seemed to intensify their focus on the topics that mattered most. There's something else, Cher continued, her voice taking on a more reflective tone. I've been thinking about aging in the public eye and what it means to stay relevant without trying to be something you're not. I'm in my 70s now, and while I feel grateful for the career I've had, I also wonder about the example I'm setting for younger women about growing older with dignity. The comment surprised both William and Catherine, not because the concern was inappropriate, but because it revealed a thoughtfulness about legacy and impact that went far beyond typical celebrity considerations. Here was a woman who had successfully reinvented herself multiple times throughout her career, yet she was still questioning whether she was navigating the aging process in a way that served others positively. From our perspective, Williams said carefully, "What we've always admired about your career is that you've seemed to evolve naturally rather than fighting against change. Your recent work feels as authentic as your earlier music, just reflecting different life experiences." "That's generous of you to say," Cher replied. "But I'll admit there are moments when I look around at the entertainment industry and wonder if I'm holding on too long or if there's still value in what I have to offer." Catherine leaned forward with genuine interest. "What do you think has kept you grounded through all the changes in your career and personal life? Because from the outside, you've always seemed remarkably consistent in your core values, even as everything else evolved." The question seemed to strike something deep in Cher's thinking. She was quiet for a moment, considering her response with the kind of care that suggested this was a topic she had been wrestling with internally. "I think it comes down to never pretending to be perfect," she said finally. "Early in my career, I made the decision that I would rather be criticized for being myself than praised for being someone else. That choice has been tested many times, especially during difficult periods in my personal life." William found himself thinking about his own relationship with public perception and the pressure to present a polished image that never wavered. That sounds simple in principle, but it must have been incredibly difficult in practice. The public often expects consistency that doesn't account for human growth and change. "Oh, it was terrifying sometimes," Cher laughed, but the sound carried undertones of remembered anxiety. "Especially in the early days when my career could have been destroyed by one wrong move or controversial statement. But I realized that trying to be someone else was exhausting and ultimately impossible to sustain." Their conversation was developing into an exploration of authenticity that went far beyond their individual circumstances. They were discussing the broader challenge of maintaining genuine identity while fulfilling public roles that carried enormous responsibility and scrutiny. "We found that our children are often our best teachers about staying real," Catherine shared. "They have no tolerance for pretense, and they're quick to call us out when we're being anything other than ourselves. It's both humbling and helpful." "Children are amazing that way," Cher agreed. "Chaz and Elijah have always been my reality check. When I've gotten too caught up in the Hollywood nonsense or started believing my own publicity, they've been there to remind me of what actually matters." The mention of her children brought the conversation back to one of the evening's central themes, the challenge of raising families while living in the public eye. All three of them had navigated this territory, though with different variables and constraints. "How did you handle media attention around your children when they were younger?" William asked. "We're still figuring out the balance between protecting their privacy and acknowledging that public interest in them is inevitable." Cher's expression became more serious as she considered the question. "I made some mistakes early on," she admitted. I thought I could control the narrative by being open about certain things and private about others. But I learned that once you invite media attention into your family life, it becomes very difficult to set boundaries that others respect. What would you do differently if you could go back? Catherine asked. I would have been more protective of their ordinary moments, Cher replied without hesitation. The special occasions and milestones will always be public to some degree when you're in our position. But I wish I had fought harder to keep their everyday experiences private. Things like school events, friendships, even family dinners became performance opportunities when they should have just been life. The insight resonated strongly with both William and Catherine, who had been wrestling with similar decisions about their own children's exposure to public life. The balance between acknowledging public interest and protecting childhood normalcy remained one of their most challenging responsibilities. We've been trying to give them choices as they get older, William said. George is starting to understand that his life will be different from his friends, but we want him to have as much agency as possible in deciding how much he wants to participate in public events. That's wise, Cher nodded. Agency is so important. I think some of the difficulties Chaz and I went through when he was younger came from my assumption that I knew what was best for him without really asking what he wanted or needed. The conversation was revealing layers of complexity around parenting in the public eye that none of them had fully explored in previous interviews or public statements. There was something about the private setting and their mutual understanding of unique challenges that allowed for more honest reflection than usual. Outside, the sounds of the gala had shifted as guests moved into the dining hall, and the evening's formal program began. Yet none of the three seemed eager to end their conversation. They had discovered a rare opportunity for genuine connection around topics that were central to their lives, but rarely discussed openly. Can I ask you something personal? Catherine said to Cher. Do you ever feel lonely despite being surrounded by people who care about you? I know that might sound strange coming from someone in our position, but sometimes the public nature of our lives can make genuine connection feel complicated. Cher's face softened with recognition. All the time, she replied simply. There are moments when I'm performing for thousands of people who are singing along to songs I wrote about my deepest experiences, and I feel completely isolated. The irony is that I'm sharing my most personal thoughts with strangers while feeling disconnected from the people closest to me. William nodded with understanding. The performative aspect of public life can become so automatic that it's sometimes difficult to access authentic emotions, even in private moments. We've both experienced feeling like we're watching ourselves play roles rather than simply living our lives. How do you reconnect with yourselves when that happens? Cher asked, her question directed to both of them, but carrying the weight of someone seeking practical strategies rather than theoretical advice. We've learned to create completely private spaces, Catherine replied. Times and places where there are no cameras, no staff, no agenda beyond just being together as a family. Even if it's just an hour on Sunday morning when we make pancakes and let the children be completely silly. And we try to maintain friendships with people who knew us before our public roles became so defined, William added. Friends who feel comfortable challenging us or pointing out when we're taking ourselves too seriously. Cher smiled at their responses. I have a few friends like that. People who will tell me when I'm being ridiculous or when I need to stop overthinking something. They're worth their weight in gold. Their conversation was creating a foundation of mutual understanding that went beyond their initial meeting's purpose. They were discovering that despite their different backgrounds and career paths, they shared fundamental challenges around authenticity, family protection, and maintaining personal identity within public roles. As their conversation deepened, the formal gala outside their private sanctuary seemed to fade into background noise. The three had found themselves in a rare situation where their usual public personas could be set aside in favor of honest exploration of the challenges that united them across different spheres of fame and responsibility. There's something I've been curious about, Cher said, settling back in her chair with the comfort of someone who had found her conversational rhythm. How do you handle the criticism? Not just the tabloid nonsense, but the legitimate critiques from people who expect you to be perfect in ways that no human being actually can be. The question touched on something that all public figures grappled with, but rarely discussed openly. William and Catherine had both developed strategies over the years for processing negative feedback while maintaining their emotional well-being, but it remained one of the more challenging aspects of their roles. It depends on the source and the substance, William replied thoughtfully. Criticism from people we respect about areas where we can genuinely improve is actually valuable, even when it's difficult to hear. But the criticism that assumes we should never make mistakes or that judges our private moments based on incomplete information is harder to process constructively. Catherine nodded in agreement. We've learned to ask ourselves whether the criticism is about our actions or about unrealistic expectations that others have placed on us. If it's the former, we try to learn from it. If it's the latter, we have to find ways to let it go without taking it personally. That's a much healthier approach than I used to have, Cher admitted. For years, I would read everything written about me and try to defend myself against every unfair characterization. It was exhausting and ultimately counterproductive. I was spending more energy on managing my public image than on doing the work that actually mattered to me. Her admission revealed a learning curve that all three had experienced in different ways. The temptation to control public perception often conflicted with the energy required to do meaningful work, creating a tension that could consume enormous amounts of mental and emotional resources. When did you realize that approach wasn't sustainable? Catherine asked, genuinely curious about Cher's evolution in this area. I think it was during my son's transition, Cher replied, her voice taking on a more reflective tone. Suddenly, there were people criticizing not just my music or my fashion choices, but my parenting and my family relationships. The stakes fell higher because it wasn't just about me anymore. She paused, looking out the window at the London evening. I remember reading an article that questioned whether I was being supportive enough, whether I was handling everything correctly, and I realized that I was spending so much time worrying about public perception that I wasn't fully present for what my son was actually experiencing. William felt a recognition in her words that connected to his own experiences with family challenges playing out in public. The media attention around our struggles with mental health awareness has taught us that we can't control how our efforts are interpreted. We can only focus on doing what we believe is right and trust that our intentions will ultimately speak for themselves. But that requires a level of faith that can be really difficult to maintain, Cher observed, especially when you're dealing with topics that are important to you and you want to get them right. The conversation was touching on something fundamental about living in the public eye. The challenge of accepting that good intentions and sincere efforts didn't guarantee positive reception or accurate understanding. All three had experienced situations where their actions were misinterpreted or their motives questioned despite their best efforts to be clear and authentic. We found that focusing on the people who are actually affected by our work helps, Catherine said. When we visit hospitals or meet with families dealing with mental health challenges, their responses remind us of why we're doing this work in the first place. Their feedback is more valuable than any media analysis. That's so important, Cher agreed enthusiastically. The people who benefit from charitable work or who connect with artistic expression are the ones whose opinions actually matter. They're the reason we have platforms in the first place. Their discussion was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Lady Margaret appeared with an apologetic expression. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but the dinner program is about to begin, and several guests have specifically asked about meeting Miss Cher. Would it be possible to join the main reception for a few minutes? All three looked at each other with expressions that clearly communicated their reluctance to end their conversation. However, they also understood the obligations that had brought them to the event in the first place. Of course, Cher replied graciously. We should probably make an appearance. But she turned to William and Catherine. Would it be possible to continue our conversation later? This has been incredibly meaningful for me. Absolutely, William responded without hesitation. Perhaps we could arrange a more private meeting sometime in the near future. This conversation has been valuable for us as well. As they prepared to leave the green room, Catherine turned to Cher with a question that had been forming throughout their discussion. Earlier, you mentioned considering sharing more about your personal experiences publicly. What's holding you back from moving forward with that? Cher considered the question as they walked toward the main reception. I think it's the fear of being misunderstood or having my family's experiences reduced to entertainment. The stories I want to tell are about growth and learning and finding ways to love people through difficult circumstances. But I worry that they'll be sensationalized or oversimplified. We've faced similar concerns with our mental health advocacy, Williams said as they navigated the elegant corridor. What we've learned is that controlling the context matters enormously. When we share personal experiences in settings where we can provide full context and have meaningful conversations, the response is usually positive. When those same experiences are taken out of context or reported in fragments, they can be misrepresented. They paused outside the main reception hall, where the sounds of conversation and laughter indicated that the evening's formal program was well underway. Through the open doors, they could see elegantly dressed guests seated at round tables decorated with autumn flowers and soft lighting. Maybe the key is finding the right platform and the right moment, Catherine suggested. When you feel ready to tell those stories in a way that honors everyone involved and serves the purposes you want them to serve. Cher smiled at her response. Talking with both of you tonight has helped clarify some of my thinking about this. Sometimes you need to have conversations with people who understand the complexities before you can figure out how to communicate with a broader audience. As they entered the reception hall together, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. Conversations paused as guests recognized their small group. Cameras appeared from various directions, and the careful choreography of a high-profile charity event resumed. Yet something had changed for all three of them during their private conversation. The dinner program proceeded with the expected speeches, presentations, and recognition of major donors. Cher was honored for her longtime support of the Children's Hospital, delivering brief remarks that focused on the medical staff's dedication and the resilience of the young patients she had met during her visits. William and Catherine also spoke about their continued commitment to pediatric health care and their gratitude for the partnership with supporters who understood that healing involved not just medical treatment, but also emotional and psychological support for entire families. Throughout the formal presentations, all three found themselves making eye contact across the room, sharing small smiles that acknowledged the deeper conversation they had begun in private. The public program was meaningful and important, but it represented only a portion of what had made the evening significant. During the reception that followed dinner, they moved through different circles of guests, participating in the kinds of conversations that were expected at such events. Yet each found opportunities to return to topics that had emerged during their private discussion. When Cher spoke with other guests about her charitable work, she found herself incorporating insights from her conversation with the royal couple about the importance of maintaining authentic connections with the people served by philanthropic efforts. When William and Catherine discussed their mental health advocacy with various attendees, they referenced ideas that had crystallized during their discussion about vulnerability and public service. The evening was demonstrating how meaningful private conversations could enhance and deepen public engagement rather than detracting from it. By having honest discussions about their shared challenges and approaches, all three had discovered new ways to think about their public roles and responsibilities. As the formal program concluded and guests began to make their departures, the three found themselves together again near the venue's entrance. The energy was different now, more relaxed, but also more purposeful. "This has been extraordinary," Cher said, gathering her wrap as they prepared to leave. "I came here tonight thinking I want to meet you both, but I had no idea how much I needed this conversation." "The feeling is mutual," Catherine replied warmly. "We rarely have opportunities to discuss these topics with someone who understands them from personal experience." They exchanged contact information with the intention of continuing their conversation in a more private setting. The evening had opened doors to discussions that all three wanted to pursue further, both for their own growth and for the potential benefit to their various public platforms. As they said their goodbyes, William extended an invitation that surprised even himself. "Would you be interested in visiting us at Kensington Palace sometime? We could have a proper conversation without time constraints or public obligations." Cher's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I would love that. Thank you for trusting me with that invitation." The three parted ways with a sense that their chance encounter had evolved into something much more significant than any of them had anticipated when the evening began. 3 weeks after their initial meeting at the charity gala, Cher found herself walking through the private gardens of Kensington Palace on a crisp November afternoon. The setting was far more intimate than their previous encounter, with no cameras, no formal protocols, and no audience beyond William, Catherine, and their 3 children, who were playing on an elaborate wooden swing set visible through the large windows of the family's private sitting room. The informality of the setting struck her immediately. This wasn't the formal reception room she had expected, but rather a comfortable family space with toys scattered on Persian rugs, children's artwork displayed alongside priceless paintings, and the general comfortable chaos that indicated a home where real life took precedence over perfect presentation. "I hope you don't mind the casual atmosphere," Catherine said as she poured tea from a simple ceramic pot rather than the elaborate silver service that might have been expected for such an occasion. "The children are home from school today, and we thought you might enjoy meeting them." "This is perfect," Cher replied, settling into a well-worn armchair that faced the garden windows. "I much prefer authentic family environments to formal meeting rooms. Some of my best conversations have happened in kitchens and living rooms rather than in official settings." William appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of homemade biscuits and sandwiches, his casual clothing and relaxed demeanor reinforcing the sense that this was a genuine invitation to their personal space rather than an official royal audience. "The children are very excited to meet you," he said with a grin. "George has been practicing questions he wants to ask about your music, and Charlotte has been insisting that we tell her everything we know about your career. Louis is mainly interested in whether you like football." The mention of their children brought an immediate warmth to Cher's expression. Throughout her career, some of her most meaningful encounters had been with young people who approach her work without the preconceptions and analysis that often characterized adult interactions. "I would love to meet them," she said. "Children often have the best perspectives on everything. They haven't learned yet to overcomplicate simple truths." As if summoned by their conversation, the garden door burst open and 3 young voices filled the room with excited chatter. George, Charlotte, and Louis entered with the kind of energy that transforms any space into something more lively and unpredictable. "Are you really Cher?" Charlotte asked with the direct curiosity that characterized children her age. "Mummy and Papa said you're a famous singer, but you look like a normal person." Cher laughed with genuine delight at the observation. "I am Cher, and you're absolutely right that I'm a normal person. Being famous doesn't change the parts of you that really matter." "What's your name?" "I'm Charlotte, and this is George and Louis," she replied, gesturing to her brothers with the authority of someone accustomed to handling introductions. "George wants to ask you about music, and Louis wants to know if you like football, and I want to know if being famous is fun or if it's mostly work." The questions revealed the different personalities and interests of the 3 children, but they also demonstrated the kind of directness that adults rarely brought to conversations with celebrities. There was no agenda beyond curiosity, no attempt to impress or achieve specific outcomes. "Those are excellent questions," Cher said seriously, giving each child her full attention. "Being famous has parts that are fun and parts that are work, just like your parents' jobs probably do. The fun parts are getting to make music that makes people happy and meeting interesting people like your family. The work parts are having to travel a lot and sometimes missing normal family time." George, clearly the most musically curious of the 3, stepped forward with the kind of confidence that suggested he had been rehearsing his approach. "Papa said you've been making music for longer than he's been alive. How do you remember all the songs?" The question made all the adults smile, both because of its innocence and because it highlighted something remarkable about Cher's career longevity that even sophisticated music critics rarely addressed so directly. That's actually a very smart question, Cher replied. I don't remember all of them perfectly, especially during concerts. Sometimes I have to peek at notes, and sometimes I make mistakes and just keep singing anyway. The audience usually doesn't mind because they're having fun too. Lewis, who had been fidgeting with typical 7-year-old energy, suddenly focused on her with intense interest. Do you really want to know about football, or were Mummy and Papa just saying that to be nice? His question revealed the kind of social awareness that children develop early in families, where public interactions are often carefully managed. He was testing whether adult interest in his passions was genuine or performative. I do want to know, Cher assured him. I don't know very much about football, especially the kind you play here in England, but I like learning about things that make other people excited. What's your favorite thing about it? As Lewis launched into an enthusiastic explanation of his favorite teams and players, William and Catherine exchanged glances that spoke to their pleasure in watching their children interact naturally with someone who could easily have been intimidating or overwhelming. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Cher had experienced in decades of celebrity interactions. The children asked questions without filter, offered observations without concern for social appropriateness, and responded to her answers with the kind of honest engagement that revealed whether her responses resonated authentically. Can you sing something? Charlotte asked after they had covered topics ranging from favorite colors to travel experiences. Papa sometimes sings to us, but he's not very good at it. Thank you very much, Charlotte, William replied with mock indignation that made all the children giggle. My singing is perfectly adequate for bedtime songs and car journeys. Cher considered the request thoughtfully. Performing in someone's living room for an audience of 3 children represented a completely different challenge than stadium concerts or television appearances. There was no amplification, no stage lighting, and no distance between performer and audience. I could sing something, she said, but only if you promise to sing along if you know the words. Singing is always better when it's shared. She chose turn back time, partly because it was familiar enough that the adults could join in if they wanted to, but also because its themes of reflection and growth seemed appropriate for the intimate setting and the deeper conversations they had been having. As her voice filled the comfortable room, something magical happened. The children listened with the kind of attention they usually reserve for their favorite bedtime stories, while William and Catherine found themselves hearing familiar lyrics in a completely new context. The song's exploration of regret and the desire to handle important relationships differently resonated with recent conversations about parenting, public service, and personal growth. When the song ended, the room was quiet for a moment before Lewis began clapping with enthusiastic approval. That was brilliant, he declared. Much better than Papa's singing. The honest response from the children seemed to break down the last barriers of formality in the room. What followed was an hour of the kind of easy conversation that develops when people feel genuinely comfortable with each other. The children showed Cher their favorite books, explained the rules of games they had invented, and offered opinions on everything from family holidays to their favorite meals. In return, she shared stories about growing up in a different era, described some of the more amusing mishaps from her touring experiences, and answered their questions about everything from stage costumes to jet lag. Do you ever get scared when you're performing? George asked during a quiet moment when his siblings had become distracted by a puzzle on the floor. The question revealed a more serious curiosity beneath his earlier musical interests. As the oldest of the 3 children, he was beginning to understand that his own life would eventually involve public attention, and he seemed to be gathering information about how adults manage those pressures. Sometimes, Cher answered honestly, especially when I'm trying something new or when I'm singing about something very personal. But I've learned that feeling scared often means you're doing something important. The trick is not to let the fear stop you from doing things that matter to you. Her response seemed to satisfy something in George's thinking, and he nodded with the kind of seriousness that suggested he was filing the information away for future reference. As the afternoon progressed, William and Catherine found opportunities to continue their deeper conversations with Cher while the children played nearby. The domestic setting allowed for a different kind of exchange than their previous meeting, one that incorporated family life rather than existing separately from it. "Watching you with the children has been remarkable," Catherine said during a moment when all three were engaged in building an elaborate castle for blocks. "You have such a natural way of engaging with them without talking down to them or being overly precious about their responses." "Children are my favorite audiences," Cher replied. "They respond to authenticity in ways that adults sometimes can't because they haven't learned to analyze everything to death. If you're being genuine, they can sense it immediately. If you're being fake, they'll call you out on it just as quickly." The observation connected to broader themes they had been exploring about authentic communication and the challenges of maintaining genuine connections while living in the public eye. Children served as natural authenticity detectors, providing immediate feedback about whether adult behavior matched adult intentions. "We've noticed that with our own public work," William said. "When we visit schools or hospitals, the children's responses tell us immediately whether we're connecting meaningfully or just going through the motions. They have no patience for performative engagement." As the afternoon drew toward evening, the children were called away for their bath and bedtime routines, leaving the three adults to continue their conversation in the quieter atmosphere that followed their energetic presence. "Thank you for including them in our visit," Cher said as she watched the children reluctantly head upstairs. "That was exactly what I needed today, though I'm not sure I could have articulated that need before experiencing it." The comment revealed something about the healing power of normal family interactions for people whose lives were often dominated by public obligations and formal requirements. The simple pleasure of answering children's honest questions and participating in their games provided a kind of grounding that was difficult to find in more structured settings. As evening settled over Kensington Palace and the children's voices faded into the upper floors, the three adults found themselves in the comfortable aftermath of a day that had exceeded all expectations. The formal sitting room now felt like a sanctuary where honest conversation could flourish without the constraints that typically govern their public interactions. "I have to tell you something," Cher said as Catherine refreshed their tea, and William adjusted the lamp to accommodate the gathering dusk. "I've been thinking constantly about our conversation from the gala, and today has crystallized something I've been struggling with for months." She paused, looking out at the palace gardens where security lights were beginning to illuminate the pathways. "I've been so worried about saying the wrong thing or being misunderstood that I've been paralyzed about sharing some of the most important experiences of my life. But watching how naturally you both balance authenticity with responsibility has given me a different perspective." William and Catherine waited for her to continue, recognizing the weight of what she was trying to articulate. Their own journey toward finding that balance had been filled with mistakes, learning experiences, and gradual discoveries about what worked for their family and their public roles. "What specifically has shifted for you?" Catherine asked gently, her years of navigating similar terrain evident in her ability to create space for difficult revelations. "I think I've been treating vulnerability like a risk to be managed rather than a gift to be shared thoughtfully," Cher replied. "Your approach to mental health advocacy has shown me that there's a difference between exploitation and authentic sharing. The difference lies in the intention and the context." Her insight touched on something fundamental about public disclosure of personal experiences. All three had grappled with the challenge of determining when sharing difficult experiences served others versus when it simply satisfied public curiosity or personal need for validation. "We've made mistakes in that area," William admitted. "Early in our marriage, we sometimes shared things because we felt pressure to be relatable, rather than because we genuinely believed our experiences could help others. The motivation matters enormously." "How do you know the difference now?" Cher asked, her question carrying the weight of someone seeking practical guidance rather than theoretical discussion. Catherine considered the question carefully before responding. We've learned to ask ourselves whether we would share this experience with someone we cared about who was facing similar circumstances. If the answer is yes, and if we can provide useful context and perspective, then it's probably worth sharing more broadly. If we're motivated by other factors, we try to step back and reconsider. The framework they described offered a concrete approach to decisions that could otherwise feel overwhelming or arbitrary. By grounding disclosure decisions in genuine care for others rather than public relation strategies or personal validation needs, they had developed a method that served both their authentic selves and their public responsibilities. That makes so much sense, Cher said with obvious relief. I've been thinking about sharing my experiences with Chaz's transition, not because I want attention or sympathy, but because I wish I had heard from other parents who went through similar journeys when I was struggling to understand and support him properly. Her statement revealed the kind of service-oriented motivation that distinguished helpful disclosure from exploitation. She wasn't seeking to dramatize her family's experiences, but rather to offer support and perspective to others facing similar challenges. What held you back from moving forward with that instinct? William asked, genuinely curious about the specific barriers that had prevented her from acting on what seemed like a clear and valuable impulse. Fear of being judged, fear of hurting Chaz by discussing his private experiences publicly, and, honestly, fear of not being eloquent enough to do justice to the complexity of what we went through. She replied with the kind of honesty that had characterized their entire conversation. The fears she described were entirely reasonable and reflected the kind of careful consideration that should precede any decision to share deeply personal experiences publicly. Rather than being obstacles to overcome, they represented important factors to address thoughtfully. Have you talked with Chaz about your interest in sharing your perspective on his transition? Catherine asked. We've found that including family members in decisions about public disclosure helps ensure that everyone feels respected and protected. We've had preliminary conversations, Cher said, and he's been supportive in principle. But I want to make sure that anything I say serves his interests as well as potentially helping other families. His privacy and dignity have to be the top priority. Her approach demonstrated the kind of consideration that distinguished responsible sharing from exploitation. By centering her son's well-being and agency in the decision-making process, she was modeling the kind of thoughtful disclosure that could genuinely benefit others without causing harm to the people closest to her. As their conversation continued, it became clear that the evening was serving multiple purposes beyond their original intention to deepen their friendship. Cher was working through important decisions about her public platform, while William and Catherine were reflecting on their own approaches to authentic communication and family protection. There's something else I want to discuss with both of you, Cher said, her tone becoming more serious. I've been invited to participate in a documentary about LGBTQ families, and the producers are particularly interested in my experiences as a parent. After our conversations, I'm feeling more confident about participating, but I'd love your thoughts on how to approach it thoughtfully. The request represented exactly the kind of situation they had been discussing theoretically, but with concrete stakes and real implications for both Cher's family and the broader community that might benefit from her participation. What aspects of the project feel most important to you? William asked, approaching the question with the same careful consideration he brought to his own media decisions. The opportunity to normalize the experience of loving and supporting LGBTQ children, Cher replied without hesitation. I want parents who are struggling with similar situations to know that it's possible to move from confusion and fear to acceptance and celebration, even if the journey takes time and involves mistakes. Her motivation aligned perfectly with the service-oriented approach they had been discussing. Rather than seeking to dramatize her family's experiences or position herself as an expert, she was offering to share her learning process in ways that might benefit others facing similar challenges. That sounds like exactly the kind of contribution that could make a real difference, Catherine said with genuine enthusiasm. Parents in similar situations need to hear from someone who has navigated this journey successfully, especially someone who can acknowledge the difficulties while emphasizing the positive outcomes. Their discussion of the documentary project continued for another hour, with William and Catherine offering insights from their own experiences with documentary participation and media collaboration. They discussed the importance of maintaining editorial control over personal narratives, the value of working with producers who understood the sensitivity of family stories, and strategies for ensuring that complex experiences weren't oversimplified for dramatic effect. By the time their conversation began to wind down, Cher had developed a clear framework for approaching the documentary opportunity and other potential platforms for sharing her experiences. More importantly, she had gained confidence in her ability to contribute meaningfully to public conversations without compromising her family's privacy or dignity. "I can't thank you enough for this," she said as they prepared to conclude their visit. "I came here thinking I wanted advice about media strategy, but what I've gained is much more valuable. You've helped me remember why I want to share these experiences in the first place." The gratitude was mutual, though it took different forms for William and Catherine. Their conversations with Cher had reinforced their own approaches to authentic public engagement while providing new perspectives on the challenges and opportunities that came with their platforms. "We should stay in touch about how the documentary process unfolds," William said as they moved toward the entrance hall. "We'd love to support your work in whatever ways would be helpful. And please know that you're welcome here anytime," Catherine added warmly. "The children will be asking about your next visit before your car has left the palace grounds." As Cher prepared to leave, she turned back with one final observation that seemed to encapsulate the significance of their time together. "I've spent decades in this industry meeting incredible people and having memorable experiences. But it's rare to find conversations that actually change how you think about important parts of your life. That's what today has been for me." The comment reflected something that all three had experienced during their unexpected friendship. Beyond the novelty of their different backgrounds and careers, they had discovered genuine compatibility around values, approaches to family life, and perspectives on using public platforms responsibly. In the months that followed their palace visit, their friendship continued to develop through regular communication and occasional private meetings. Cher moved forward with the documentary project, drawing on insights from their conversations to share her family's experiences in ways that honored everyone involved while providing valuable support to other families. The documentary, when it was released 6 months later, was praised for its thoughtful approach to complex family dynamics and its emphasis on growth and learning rather than drama and conflict. Cher's participation was particularly noted for its authenticity and its practical value to parents facing similar challenges. William and Catherine watched the documentary together on a quiet evening at home, recognizing in Cher's words and approach many of the principles they had discussed during their conversations. Her willingness to share her learning process, acknowledge her mistakes, and emphasize her son's strength and autonomy demonstrated exactly the kind of responsible disclosure they had been exploring together. Their friendship had evolved into something that enriched all their lives, while potentially benefiting the broader communities they served through their various platforms. By finding common ground around shared values and mutual respect, they had created relationships that transcended their different backgrounds and career paths. The story of their connection served as a reminder that meaningful relationships could develop in unexpected places, that authentic conversation remained possible even within the constraints of public life, and that people from vastly different backgrounds often shared more fundamental similarities than surface differences might suggest. Their ongoing friendship continued to influence their respective approaches to public service, family life, and authentic communication, demonstrating that the most valuable encounters often came from genuine human connection rather than formal professional obligations. In finding each other, they had each discovered new possibilities for living authentically while fulfilling their public responsibilities with grace, wisdom, and genuine care for the people their platforms allowed them to serve.